We have seen the most radical experiment in open borders this nation has ever seen.
It's 2023. Explosions at the border, overcrowded shelters, bus loads of migrants sent from one city to another.
Never been like this. You see, homeless people and migrants and people getting robbed and pushed and walk down the street, they're grabbing pocketbooks.
This is the reality in America. A country facing an immigration crisis it can't seem to fix.
We are past our breaking point.
Over 2.4 million border encounters in 2022. New York City has taken in more than 150,000 migrants, costing the city $12 billion.
We're getting 10,000 migrants a month.
Chicago has seen over 30,000 new arrivals, while Denver spends $180 million a year managing the influx.
We inherited a humanitarian crisis.
This isn't a new problem. America's immigration challenges go back generations, shaped by treaties, wars, labor demands, and border policies. And now, it feels like everything has come to a head.
To have the government come in and dump 300 people right next door to me.
We are taxpayers, we're property owners. Our money should go towards fixing our communities.
To understand this, we've got to look back, way back to the 1840s. The Mexican-American War ends, and with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico loses nearly half its territory to the U.S. Overnight, families, communities, and centuries-old migration patterns are split in two. Back then, though, the border wasn't the militarized zone we know today. It was more like a line on a map that didn't mean much. If you were a farmer in 1850, you moved north for the harvest and south for the winter. No passports, no patrols. In fact, American businesses couldn't hire Mexican workers fast enough. Fast forward to the late 1800s, and everything starts to shift. The U.S. passes its first major immigration restrictions, like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, targeting specific groups seen as economic threats during periods of high unemployment. The idea of controlling who gets to come in takes hold. By the early 1900s, we're in full swing with border patrol and quotas. But there's still a catch: the economy. America's booming industries need workers, and they're not picky about how they get them. Take the Bracero program from 1942 to 1964. It legally brought millions of Mexican farm workers to the U.S. But at the same time, policies like Operation Wetback in 1954 were deporting over 1 million people.
California's rich Imperial and Coachella valleys, guards round up Mexican workers without identity cards and start them on the road back home.
It's a constant push and pull. We need the labor, but we're not sure we want the people. Jump to the 1980s, and the border dynamic shifted dramatically. For decades, crossing the border was relatively straightforward and inexpensive, costing about $500 in today's dollars. Migrants often crossed, worked for a while, and then returned home. Over half of them, about 55%, eventually went back. But as the U.S. tightened border security, things began to change. Smuggling routes fell under the control of organized crime groups in Mexico, making the journey far more dangerous and expensive. By 2023, the cost of crossing had soared to $8,000 or more. At the same time, civil wars and economic instability in Latin America pushed more people northward, while the booming U.S. economy created a demand for cheap labor. For migrants, the risks were high, but the stakes were higher. Once they made it across, returning home became almost impossible. They couldn't afford to leave and try to cross again. Today, only about 25% of migrants go back to their home countries. Then came September 11th, 2001.
Huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life,
our very freedom came under attack.
Overnight, immigration became a national security issue. Border Patrol agents increased from 4,000 to over 20,000. The border wall expanded from 60 miles to over 700 miles. And the budget? It soared from $1.1 billion to $16.7 billion. After 9/11, the border transformed into a fortress. Meanwhile, the immigration system grew so complex, it's almost impossible to navigate. If you cross the border illegally and claim asylum, you could wait years for your case to be processed. But if you try to come legally, you might wait decades, if you qualify at all. This creates what experts call a perverse incentive, where the illegal path is often the only realistic option. So where does that leave us today? A system stretched to its breaking point. People caught in limbo, communities divided over how to handle it. And the deeper we dig, the more it feels like this crisis isn't just about immigration. It's about who we are as a country.
On day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history.
We all as a nation want this to end.
We have no more room.
Resources are running thin.
Now, if you're wondering, why don't we just deport everyone who crosses the border illegally? You're not alone. It sounds straightforward, but trust me, the reality is anything but. Let's start with the logistics. Imagine this. You're in a border town like El Paso. Every day, thousands of people arrive, some after days of walking, others carried by smugglers in overcrowded trucks. They're tired, hungry, and clutching paperwork to apply for asylum. But why? 3 major obstacles make mass deportation nearly impossible. First, legal barriers. Many migrants' home countries won't accept deportees. Second, asylum law. Claiming asylum gives migrants the legal right to stay in the U.S. while their case is heard. And third, resources. The immigration court system is completely overwhelmed. Nearly 2 million pending cases, only 700 immigration judges, and an average wait time of 4 years for a hearing. The numbers alone make it clear why the system struggles. In the meantime, many migrants are released into the U.S., often with ankle monitors or court dates they're expected to attend. By the time a decision is made, many migrants have already built lives in the U.S., making deportation an even tougher call. And even when deportation is an option, it's far from simple or cheap. A 2015 report estimated that deporting a single person costs over $10,000. Multiply that by millions, and the price tag soars into the hundreds of billions. Then add in legal appeals, international human rights claims, and the need for family considerations. It's a logistical and moral puzzle.
I was afraid that one day they would come home and he wouldn't be here.
10 minutes ago, the immigration authorities told me I'm out of options with my case.
Think about this. Imagine a family fleeing gang violence in Honduras. They've sold everything, crossed multiple countries, and finally made it to the U.S. Maybe they have children born here, making them U.S. citizens. Do you split up the family, deport everyone, let them stay? These aren't just policy decisions. They're deeply emotional and ethical dilemmas that stir heated debates.
I'm sure it's very expensive. It is something that's worth doing to preserve the rule of law.
Then there's the economic side. Many migrants aren't asylum seekers. They're coming for work in industries that desperately need labor, like agriculture and construction. Immigrants make up nearly 19% of the U.S. workforce, and their contributions keep essential sectors alive. Without them, the price of goods like fruits and vegetables could skyrocket. Entire industries might crumble. But instead of creating efficient legal pathways for these workers, the system remains clogged and broken. So why can't we just fix this? Immigration reform is no small task. Laws are a patchwork of outdated policies layered over decades. and each new attempt at reform faces political gridlock.
It's a big job, but it's a job that can be done.
Solving issues like the court backlog, the lack of legal work visas, and balancing security with compassion requires a level of bipartisan agreement we rarely see.
Immigration is a part of our nation, and if we want it to function in the way that it's supposed to function, we need to look at it differently.